Take Me to Your Leader by the Newsboys.
The Newsboys Take Me to Your Leader. Newsboys, is that a play?
Nah, Newsboys is an Australian band that's
okay.
had been sort of like a Christian sensation in the last couple of years. But I joke that they were good when they weren't popular, and that they've gotten awful since they've gotten popular. But they came out of Australia in the 80s and were kind of around the same time as like several of the really crazy Christian bands like Stryper and DeGarmo and Key and Petra. Those were all like 80s Christian bands, and it was kind of like the rise of secular Christian, or Christian music. And then,
yeah. What is up, everybody? Welcome.
Oh, hey.
We're live.
Oh, okay.
You joined in here in the middle of Noah explaining the awesome and interesting history of Christian rock bands. Jeremy was wearing like a vintage Newsboys shirt in a video he just recorded, and he got so many comments on it.
That's funny.
Just like, oh, that's the good Newsboys back in the day. Back with the Australian band members.
Yeah. They had I think their first album was Hell's for Wimps. It was great.
That's a good one, Hell's for Wimps.
So, yeah. But yeah, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the weekly Deep Dive podcast here, Wayfarers Christian Church Deep Dive podcast. My name is Nick Griffin. I'm the lead pastor here at Wayfarers. I'm joined by our regular co-host today. We got Noah Randolph.
Hey, everyone.
He's the associate pastor here at Wayfarers, and the fan favorite, everybody's favorite, Ashley Wakefield.
Hey, everybody.
So it's just going to be the three of us today. We didn't catch Garrett in time to ask him to join us, and Tom is also busy at the moment. So we just got the small group today, but it should still be a pretty fun conversation. If this is your first time tuning in with us, usually what we do in these podcasts is we just take they're called deep dive podcasts for a reason. We just take an opportunity to try to go as deep as possible in different topics and issues, sometimes related to the sermons that we cover on our Sunday services. There's some things that we just don't have time to go deeper in during a Sunday service, so we'll do it here on this podcast. And also we will sometimes just discuss various different, I guess I would call them like hot button issues that a lot of people are have a lot of opinions about. And we like to try to bring, a thoughtful and biblical perspective to some of those issues. Today, we are dealing with a very practical issue, something that I would imagine a lot of Christians have had to deal with at some point in time or another, which is the question of how to set boundaries between the people that we are maybe trying to help. I don't remember. Maybe you guys can remember, because this topic came up in the middle of last week's episode. Do you guys remember how we got to this topic exactly? What was the genesis of the idea?
It was sort of a rabbit hole from tithing to wasn't it like the, oh man. Actually, I can't remember anymore. I know. Somehow we got from tithing to that.
Yeah, last week we were talking about tithing. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that episode, I would say go back and listen to it. Maybe when you listen to it, you can find out exactly how we got to this issue. I remember. Ashley, you were telling us about your cousin, I believe, and how she had maybe cut some people out of her life because they were just
she
more
was
work than
saying that there was like a friend that she had who I guess they kept having these conversations, and I guess this friend was maybe an atheist, or maybe they had some other religion that was separate from Christianity, and so she just kept saying it was toxic. She got tired of having the conversation, so she had to end it because she had spent like a whole semester at school trying to talk to this person, and she just got fed up, and she just ended the relationship. And then, I think I had made the comment about I really didn't understand what was toxic about it, because we didn't really go into like a lot of details about what made it toxic. So I don't know if they were arguing or if it was just she just got fed up with having the same conversation over and over again. And so I was kind of like, having the conversation itself wouldn't really bother me, but I guess I was wondering, everybody has different limits. Everybody has
Right.
like their breaking point where like, okay, I'm done dealing with this. And so I think that's when you brought it up and you were like, that's a good topic for next week. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the reason I especially thought it was a good topic is just because this is a conversation I know at least me and Noah have had before ourselves, just while we're working on other things in the office, and
As everything is.
yeah, we're always talking about a million different things. But I would say part of the reason it was important to me is just because I myself have struggled with defining where that line is. I don't know. You guys know me a little bit better, but sometimes then I can know myself maybe. But tell me if you think this is true. But I would say that I probably err on the side of not drawing defined enough boundaries and over helping other people to my own detriment. That's been at least my own experience.
Yeah, I can see you doing that.
But I don't know. What about you guys? How have you felt? Are you guys good at drawing boundaries with people? Do you feel burnt out regularly, like you're helping people too much, or do you feel like you've done a good job of drawing that line?
It's weird. For me, at least, I've drawn the line like multiple times, but I've never communicated that to the other person. I just passively have decided that, I'm done with this.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of check out, but I don't actually like ever have like a full, because I don't like to be the person that just like sort of like, oh, I'm not like texting you ever again
Right.
or whatever
Right.
like that. And so it's like, I'll kind of like try and find the like easiest way to like let this relationship sort of fade is the way I call it, where they
Right.
kind of just like maybe invite you once a week and you're like, oh, I've got something going on that day. And then, that turns into 2 months. And like, it's weird. It's not like I never have that like, hey, you're toxic, I'm done with you conversation. I just kind of like slowly let it just sort of, I stopped being intentional about like setting up, because generally I'm the one that usually would set up like the, like,
Yeah, you're reaching out to hang
I'm
out with
reaching
them,
out to
you're-
them, and they're generally the ones that aren't reaching out to me. I'm usually the one reaching out to them, and so I just kind of stopped doing that, and then it kind of works itself out.
So that makes me think of kind of an interesting question, but we'll get to it here in a second. 'Cause
yeah.
I want to hear, Ashley, how have you felt about your ability to draw those boundaries?
I guess with me, what I've done with my family, like I've reached out to them in certain ways, but I guess when it actually comes to that controversial conversation of, maybe your beliefs don't line up with the word of God or your actions or whatever, I think people will usually come to me and say something first, and then I'll find a way to bring it up. Like I haven't really made the effort to just call somebody up or invite them out to lunch or something and just
Right.
say, hey, like, let's discuss this issue. And that was kind of what happened with my cousin. Like she came over to my house just to do my makeup. It wasn't
Right.
like supposed to be anything. And then she just started asking random questions about how do you feel about pastors getting paid? Like, how do you
Right.
feel about this? How do you feel about that? And it just spilled over into this huge conversation and an argument. And I guess what I've done in the past when I had a friend who basically was agnostic and I was Christian, and granted back then I wasn't as deep in my faith as I am now.
Right.
But I think that when we would have like disagreements, I don't think it ever spilled over into anything like really bad. So I would just tell her, okay, we have a difference of opinion. You think your way, I think mine. And I think at that it was just kind of like we just agreed to disagree on that and just kind of let it go. But with with the situation I had with my cousin last time, I think what I would do is probably not have a conversation with her again until I did more work on myself to be able to handle that better, so that I wouldn't just blow up, like that. Because, she was asking some pretty controversial questions. And I think that, she was getting kind of heated and so was I. So I feel like with someone like that, you kind of have to know how to converse with them without arguing.
Right.
And so, religion and, all that kind of stuff is a sensitive subject. So, like,
Right.
I feel like I would probably figure out how to handle that differently before I approached her again. Because at this point in time, if she wanted to talk about it, I was like, no, I'm not going to deal with that because I don't want the same thing to happen the next time that it did last time. So I guess for me, it would depend on my relationship with that person, how they respond to it.
Right.
And so I think that I wouldn't necessarily like end it. I think that if the relationship for some reason was toxic,
Right.
then I would end it. But I think that I would kind of do something similar to Noah. I would just kind of
Right.
fall. I would just like go ghost on you. It's like you just wouldn't hear from me, and then you text me, and I wouldn't respond back, and it would just be like that.
Well, see, yeah, you can't ghost them. At least I've learned that because then they know something's wrong. But if you're just like, oh yeah, sure, let's hang out, and then you never like set a date or anything like that, then it's just like you forgot.
I don't know. Like what? I probably would.
So there's kind of two things that this brings to mind for me. One is that at least the situation with your cousin, and it sounds like maybe the hypothetical one you've thought about yourself, Ashley, is more of a war of ideas type situation where you maybe just disagree with somebody about religion in general, or maybe specifics about Christianity, how things work, and that's kind of one of the difficult types of relationships, which can be one where you maybe disagree on certain core concepts, and it feels like you are just always arguing or
Yeah.
debating. And so you said, Ashley, you would like to make sure you do your research and make sure you've got your ideas
Well-
organized before you would try to.
Well, I guess
go into
it was
somebody
more
like
like
that.
getting my emotions in check because, like, I don't want to, because, like when you're having a debate like that, you can get really angry very easily, especially
Yeah.
when you don't agree, but not only don't agree, but you feel like the other person is just missing so many different facts that they don't understand. And then they're not listening to you and then not agreeing with you. And it's just like, okay. And then it's just like back and forth because, like, they don't want to understand what you're saying and then you don't want to understand what they're saying. And so it becomes like an issue of, like, anger is just getting in the way of something that needs to be produced.
That makes
sense.
sense. No, that's really wise. So, like, the basic idea is, like, I want to make sure that this is actually going to be a productive conversation and not just one.
A
that
shouting
gets
match,
heated.
yeah.
Yeah, because yeah.
But the reason I thought that was interesting is just because that is kind of the difficult relationship I've seen a lot of people in. I'll just say specifically, I've seen a lot of my friends be in this a situation when it comes recently here to politics. That's been a big issue, maybe with their parents, maybe with other people they know. It gets harder and harder to hang out with certain people when you have just very different opinions on certain issues. And you always got that one friend that's like researched everything. They know they're up on every news story. They know and so it's super tiring to sit there and have to talk to them because you feel like you've got to do all of the the research ahead of time, and so sometimes you may just avoid hanging out with them because it's just so tiring to kind of have those conversations. And so that is maybe a good example of the types of personalities, I guess, that can be draining on you, or certain people like are fueled by that. I know some people
that love that.
Oh, this is great. I'll talk about this all the time. Let's debate issues. Like the eternal devil's advocate kind of people, and that doesn't drain them. And so, I guess my main point is what I've realized is that different personalities get drained by different types of people.
Yeah.
And that's been hard for me to understand, but I've had to try to understand that more for other people. So, like, I'm generally pretty extroverted. I love hanging out, love talking with people. I'm not going to get drained by that sort of experience with certain people.
You will get mad though, right? 'Cause
What's that?
You have gotten mad before though, right? But you just don't get drained by it, right?
Yeah, or just the process of being around people doesn't necessarily drain me like it might other people.
Right.
So things like you want to go to this church potluck, or you want to go to this event to hang out with other people, or you want to go hang out with friends at a coffee shop, or you want to go do whatever. My capacity to do that is a lot higher than like, especially I'm thinking of Adrienne, my wife. She's more introverted. She's like, no, I need a recharge period.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of issues those first few years of marriage where I would just show up at the house and be like, hey, we're going out to coffee with Noah. Go ahead and get ready and we're going to head out. And she's like,
She's
no,
like, why?
give me some heads up because that's going to drain me. And that was something that I had to realize, because I guess if there's a principle I want to apply here, something I've realized with boundaries, is that it kind of is up to each person to set their own boundaries sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's not wise on our parts to judge where other people are setting those boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really easy sometimes for us to be like, I don't draw that boundary. Why are you drawing that boundary?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so that was one of my first thoughts when you were explaining about your cousin, because it sounds like, I don't know the full story. We don't know the full story. But it sounds like she was just kind of like tired of arguing with this person and was just like, no, I'm going to draw the line. But I remember what you said last week is you were like, I don't know if that would have been where I drew the line or not, because
Yeah.
you maybe are a little bit more prepared and maybe have a little bit more capacity for having those sort of conversations.
Yeah.
That could be a part of looking at why are certain people drawing boundaries in places that other people wouldn't.
Yeah, and the ironic thing, well, yeah, I guess it is kind of ironic. When you brought that up, it made me think of something, because I do think that I'm a little bit more on the introverted side, because I do love to hang out with people and everything, but it's like, okay, I kind of need a day to like recharge, and then we can go back and hang out again later after I
Sure.
recharge. But because after the whole argument and everything, I felt so bad about it, about the way I acted, and so I texted her and apologized, and her response was just kind of like, I wasn't offended, like I was fine, like I know that
Yeah.
I know that it's a controversial topic, so I'm good. And
Yeah.
so it was like, it didn't bother her, but it bothered me, because for me it was extremely draining, but for her it wasn't. And so it made me think that, well, if that kind of thing isn't draining for you, what was so draining about talking to the person? So I don't know if it was just like the repetition of what we did, but it was just like over and over again that was draining for her. So I don't know if it for her it's just, I can do that, like I don't care if I do it, it's just like doing it over and over again that bothers
Right.
her. So I don't
That
I don't
sense.
know. Yeah.
And so you it was a more tense situation for you than it was for
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
And yeah, that just goes back to the point I'm making, as I'm thinking about it, is just like different it's just something I've had to realize. Different people, different personalities, different environments are going to need different boundaries. And sometimes it's not wise to be imposing our own
Yeah.
boundary lines on other people. And like I said, that's just something I've had to learn the hard way. The difficult part is sometimes I think people are using their personality or whatever as an excuse to draw a boundary a lot closer, just a lot smaller than I think is actually good. And I've been motivated, especially to really kind of push people a little bit on some of those boundaries. The particular example I can think of all the time, let me see if I can pull up the verse here, is example of Jesus. Because Jesus very famously had these boundary lines he would draw for having just personal one-on-one time with the Lord away from everybody else.
Right.
Right.
It was really, really common for Jesus to draw away
Yeah.
from, take some time, maybe wake up early in the morning, and go find a quiet place so that he could pray and that he could have that time with the Lord. And let me see if I can find this verse here.
And I don't really blame him for doing that, because when you think about how much pressure he had on from other people, because I felt like, it started off so small with like individual experiences. And then when everybody started finding out, it was like crowds of people coming. And I think that when you have that many people constantly pulling on you, you have to have a moment to basically recharge. Like you have to have a moment to talk to God, to figure out what you need to say, how you need to say it, to get yourself in the right mental space as well. Because even though he was God, he was still man. So being physically drained and mentally and emotionally drained, it's like, yeah, definitely get away. So
Yeah, and so, if anything, just kind of as a general thing, especially seeing that example we get from Jesus, just gave me permission, I feel like,
yeah,
to draw boundaries sometimes and just be like, because as Christians we always want to be there for other people, we always want to help people, we always want to make sure that we are not being selfish and we're helping other people who are in need, but what what I see from Jesus is that he knew that to be able to help people the best, you've, like you said, you need that time. You can't just be always help everybody without having some time to recharge, to reconnect with God, to rest, and to draw that kind of boundary with other people. I can't find the specific verse I'm thinking of, so you're just going to have to settle for the Nick Griffin paraphrase here. You guys go and check me and find this verse in the Bible. Don't just take my own word for it. But there's a particular verse in one of the Gospels I can remember where Jesus is drawing away for that reason. The implication is he's tired. He's been healing people all day. He gets in a boat on the Sea of Galilee and goes to get away from the people. And what the passage says is that he crosses the Sea of Galilee, and all the people, what they do is they just follow, they just walk around to the other side. And by the time he gets over to the other side, there's already a crowd of people waiting for him there. And oh wait, I think I remembered the exact verse.
It says he had compassion on them.
Yes.
Yeah. And that actually makes me think of something, because I know that one of the reasons that the disciples was with him was sort of so they can learn and grow, so that they could kind of take over what he was doing. Because I know that when he left, he was like, as great as the works that he done. I'm paraphrasing this also, but he was like, greater works will you do than I do. So it was sort of, I kind of wonder if, sometimes, they would try to do certain things. Like there was that scene where they were trying to cast out the demon. I think it was in the little boy, and then they couldn't do it. And the father was like, well, I tried to get your disciples to do it, and he couldn't. And then he like, how long will I have to put up with this faithless generation? And, so on and so forth. And so I wonder if, and this is just me like wondering, I don't know if it's actually there, but I wonder if, he was a little frustrated the fact that the disciples were there to share his burden. And it was kind of like, I'm trying to teach you guys to do this so that I can, have you share the burden with me so I don't have to carry it as much, but you guys keep, messing it up and you're not getting it. So I have to keep coming up behind you and fixing it. So
here's the verse. Cause I think that's a interesting example, but the verse, it's in Mark 6, starting in verse 30. It says, the apostles returned to Jesus from their ministry tour and told him about all they had done and taught. And then Jesus said, let's go off by ourselves to a quiet place and rest a while. He said this because there were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his apostles didn't even have time to eat. So, it's crazy. They can't even feed themselves. So they left by boat for a quiet place where they could be alone. But many people recognized them and saw them leaving, and people from many towns ran ahead along the shore and got there ahead of them. Jesus saw the huge crowd as he stepped from the boat, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. And so Jesus, he says, they don't even have time to eat. They're worn out. They've been doing all this ministry. Let's go find a quiet place to get away. He's drawing that boundary line. But what I appreciate is that those boundary lines are not solid, immovable, no change, never.
I agree with that.
And when he gets to the other side, he allows the compassion for the people to override a boundary line he was trying to draw.
Yeah.
that's cool.
And just
I
be
like that.
And just be like, okay. And so he starts teaching them, even though he's tired, even though they're hungry, even though he's trying to find a quiet place. And especially that verse has just always impacted me because there's a tendency sometimes in church leadership, especially, unfortunately, to maybe lose that compassion for people.
Yeah.
And so that seems to be such an important part in not kind of burning out, even when you don't have those boundaries, is making sure that you have that love and compassion for people and recognize their needs and recognize that no boundary line should be permanent, immovable, not able to be changed. Because I've heard before, and I think they're very well-meaning pastors, especially who are like teaching other pastors. You know, here at the college that we broadcast from, we've had classes where they try to teach that to. We're trying to train up-and-coming church leaders, and I had a lot of professors and a lot of people specifically tell me how important it was to draw boundaries, and so they would say like, if you're a pastor, you got to have strict office hours. 5 o'clock hits, you're done. Turn your phone off, you know, go home, be with your family. You need that time to recharge. And some of them would be like super adamant about it, you know, like no exceptions. And they would have arguments about like, well, you know, your family's the most important. Your family comes first, then the church. You can't have your family suffering because of the church. And I understand that to a certain extent, and I think that in general, there's probably some wisdom in having those boundaries, because I do think making your family important is important. I've known a ton of pastors who unfortunately have made their ministry more important than their family, and their families have really suffered. But at least the example I remember from my own life growing up is that my dad made our family very important. It was obvious that we were very important to him, but it was also obvious that there were going to be things that could override that importance. If some emergency situation came up with the church, if there was somebody who really distinctly had a need in this moment in time, my dad would be like, hey, look, sorry, I know we had this family thing planned, but this is part of what it means to be a minister in the church. I've got to go help this person who really needs help right now. And the way most people pitch that is that like that would be detrimental to me as a child, but I actually think that was really helpful to me as a child, because it was like a teaching moment. My dad used it as a teaching moment to show me where his priorities were, and to show me that, you know, being faithful to God, helping those in need was more important to him than, you know, something that could possibly be rescheduled or different things like that. So I never felt like he didn't care about me or the ministry was more important than the family or anything like that. I just felt like he had his priorities straight and he really cared about people. And so I think those boundaries should be able to you should be able to override those boundaries if the right situation arises.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess because the more I heard you talk about it, I was like, well, where do you draw the line? It's like,
right.
You know, if like, you know, what if you're like doing everything you can for the church, but you're neglecting your child, and your child is like, well, I'm upset that you don't spend enough time with me, that you don't talk to me, that I feel like you don't really know me because you've been spending the past several months, you know, especially like when they're really young. Because I know that we had a conversation here last Thursday for our Bridging the Gap, where we talked about how, you know, those are like the most impressionable years of a child. And it's like, what if you're not there during that time because you're spending so much time in ministry? But then it's like, what if they really need you? And, you know, it's kind of like, and I thought about the issue of like, you know, what if somebody calls you really late at night and you're like in bed trying to sleep, and you're like, I'm not going to answer that phone call. But then what if it's like a church member is like in serious need of something? And it made me think about my pastor who he was helping a member of our group. And this was like long before I started going to the church, before I even knew them. But I think he was in the middle of like contemplating suicide. And so his girlfriend spoke to him first, and then she got the pastor on the phone. And then it's like, well, what if that's it? Like, what if somebody calling you late at night and it's that serious, and you're just like, I'm not going to answer the phone with you. And then that phone call, if you had answered, it would have made a difference. And it's kind of like, it's kind of hard for me to say when to draw the line.
Definitely.
But it's kind of like, you know, at the same time, like with me saying that I would, you know, ghost someone, it's kind of like if it was super toxic, you know, I would really want to, but then it's like, how do you draw that line? Right. But then it kind of made me think of a book I was reading. Garrett gave me this book. It was called Organic Outreach. And it made me think about how, I can't even remember the name of the author at the moment, but he was talking about finding different strategies for the church to bring other members in, and how when you're doing that, you kind of have to put your personal feelings and your desires aside in order to bring new people in. And he gave the example of how he went to one church and they had a conversation about what they were willing to do, what they were willing to change. Because I know that a lot of churches, especially older members, don't like change. Right. And so his thing was, well, if the music has to change to bring young people in, are you guys willing to do that? And so they did it. And he had a woman come to him basically saying that, like, I hate the guitar, I hate the singing, I hate the music. And he was just kind of like, well, are you wanting to change it? Do you want to do something about it? She was like, no, I just wanted to express the fact that I hated it. And she said, I'm not she, but he said that her saying that to him without wanting to change it was kind of like an expression to him of her saying that I don't like this, but I'm willing to do it just to bring other people in. And so it's kind of like that attitude of putting your personal feelings aside if it benefits someone else. And it made me think about something that happened today, because I know that God had been speaking to me about just preaching the gospel, like just randomly in places. And so I was like, at the very beginning of the day, was not having the best day at work. And so, because, I was getting really aggravated by my boss. And so by the time the afternoon came, because I told myself I was going to try to do this in the afternoon. And so I was just not feeling up to it at first. I was like, I'm not in the right headspace for it. I'm not going to do it today. And I was like, but is that really fair, though? Like, that's kind of selfish of me to be like, well, I'm not in the headspace where I don't feel like it, so I'm not going to do it. And so I was like, you're missing out on an opportunity because you don't want to put your feelings aside. So just go and do it. So.
Yeah. So it's like the question is, how do you know where to draw that line? And the difficulty, it sounds like, is here. How do you divide out? Because maybe one of the ways you can draw that line is to divide out maybe just your personal feelings or preferences, versus like your actual needs that you might have. They might even be personal needs. That could be one of the ways you could help draw that line on when is it too far, when is it not too far. I have a few thoughts on that, but my battery's about to die on this microphone. Oh no! Get a new battery. Noah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think starting with that question, how do you know when to draw the line? I think one of the things you can, at least what I've done in my time, has been to look at trends and see not necessarily one situation, but look at a collective group of situations and moments that you've interacted with whoever the person is that you may feel like is stressing you, and you can look at the many different times you've interacted with them, and you can ask yourself, is the trend that I always sacrifice for this person, or is the trend that like I'm always the one doing something for them and they're never doing something for me, and is the trend always that I leave less healthy than when I came,
Okay.
And you ask questions like that. And I think answering those questions, for me at least, were really helpful for deciding whether or not I should continue to sacrifice or not. Because, like, if it's like, I've had situations where people call me and been like, hey, like, my car died, I need some help. And I'm like, yeah, sure, like, let's go do that. Even though, like, I've had a very long day and, like, I don't really want to do that. But that's one of those situations where it's, like, out of the blue, kind of thing. I've also had other situations where people have had roommate issues and they constantly tell me, every time I talk to them, that they just hate their roommate and yada, 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 and just, it never ends. That's not healthy because, like, I'm just a venting machine to you now. Like, all I am is the punching bag for you to get rid of your anger. And you should be saying all this stuff to your roommate, not to me, And so, like, those are the situations where I think you can start to parse out that line, is when people tend to just treat you as, like, a venting machine, and then other times when they're legitimately wanting your input. I've also had it where, people ask your opinion not because they care about your opinion, but because they just want to hear your thoughts, and then they want to go and fight about it, and like, I think that's toxic, like they're not actually wanting to learn. They just, they want to hear your thoughts because they know you have an opinion and they want to fight about it. So, like, it's those types of situations is like, and no, I'm not dealing with that. So
it sounds like one of the questions you can ask yourself that you're kind of getting at too is, am I actually even helping this person?
Right.
Yeah. Because sometimes I'm killing.
That's actually a big one.
Yeah.
It's like, if you don't see any type of help actually being accomplished, it's like, no, this is bad.
Sometimes you may just you're killing yourself, and you're not actually doing anything to help that person get ahead. And so at that point, like it's not. Is it your Christian duty, or are you just killing yourself to do nothing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that that's actually super helpful, Noah.
Yeah.
That's making me think of a whole bunch of different things. But it's just kind of like sometimes the best way to see whether you're helping that person is to kind of look long term and just be like, hey, what's the general tone and tenor of this relationship? How does it generally go?
Yeah.
What have past interactions with this person been like? And that can maybe help you realize whether you're drawing a healthy boundary or not.
Yeah, and that reminds me of something that you've said. I think that your dad has told you about solutions to problems, and I think Garrett has said that too. Like, because I hate when people come to me always speaking negatively about someone else.
Yeah.
Because I think the best thing to do is just like, well, have you talked to them about it? Like,
Right.
you know, and give them solution. And I feel like if you're giving them solutions and encouraging them to talk to them and they refuse to do so, I think I would just ask them like, well, do you actually want the problem to be fixed or do you just want to complain about it?
Yeah.
And
And you'd
so-
be surprised how many people say, "No, I just want to complain."
And so it's just like, and I feel like in a way that's such a like a woman thing, you know, like we want to talk about things, but then don't want it fixed right away. But yeah, I feel like that if I'm giving you solutions and you refuse to take it, it's like I don't know what you want me to do. It's like because I can't keep listening to the same thing over and over again. It's like I didn't mind hearing it at first, but now it's just kind of like I don't know what. There's nothing left for me to do if you're not going to take my suggestions on how to fix it. So
And that's actually really good too, because that could go beyond just people who complain a lot. You know, whatever the issue might be. You know, this isn't generally the case, but taking your example of like you had a friend call you that was like, "Hey, my car broke down." You'd be like, "Yeah, I'll go help you out." Now, if that friend of yours refused to ever get an oil change, never changed their tires, they just kept running out of gas because they never put gas in their car, and they were calling you every week to get you to help them, there's a certain point where you'd just be like, dude, this is kind of on you. Like, it's not, this isn't just an emergency anymore.
Right.
You're not doing things to maintain your car. So bringing that analogy forward into just everyday life in general, that can be one of the most useful ways to realize whether it's time to maybe draw a boundary with somebody is if they are making no effort and or progress and or anything. You know, sometimes it's difficult to be like, what are you doing? You just kind of spin your wheels.
Right.
Like, what's going on?
that made me ask another question because that reminds me of something that got brought up when was his name Tom
Yes.
who was on the screen.
Yes.
Because I know that we got into the subject of people taking advantage of the church.
Right.
And how I talked about how we had a young lady at our church who the members were helping, like they were, you know, picking her up and taking her, you know, from work or wherever she needed to go. And so, you know, if she
Yeah.
needed this, she needed that, they were trying to, you know, get it to her. And so I think it got to a point where they were like, okay, like we don't mind helping you, but we can't keep, you know, we can't just keep giving you stuff and doing things for you. And I think at that point she just stopped coming. And so she was, you know, evidently there to get what she wanted out of it. And then when she stopped getting what she wants, she didn't want to come anymore.
Right.
And I think that there was an issue of being brought up where I think he was saying that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like people should kind of like allow the church to be taken advantage of in a way. And so I wonder, like, should the church in general draw a boundary line with that and just say that, okay, well, we've helped you enough. Like, we've been helping you pay bills. We've been helping you with your kids. We've been helping you get groceries. Like, when are you going to make an effort to do something
I'm
yourself?
pretty sure Timothy has like a boundary list of like qualifications for widows in that kind of situation where they like
Yeah.
have to like meet
yeah, I can
certain
read it.
requirements before
it's
they
in one of the
get on that
pastoral
aid
epistles.
list.
One thing that he does say,
I think it's 1 Timothy 4.
the one I was thinking of is 2 Thessalonians.
Oh, okay.
So 2
Yeah.
Thessalonians 3 here. The Apostle Paul is writing to the church in Thessalonica.
Mhm.
That's always a fun name to say, Thessalonica. And there's this very interesting verse here where in verse 6, Paul says, "And now, dear brothers and sisters, we give you this command in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Stay away from all believers who live idle lives and don't follow the traditions they receive from us. For you know that you ought to imitate us. We were not idle when we were with you. We never accepted food from anyone without paying for it. We worked hard day and night so that we could not be a burden to any of you. We certainly had the right to ask you to feed us, but we wanted to give you an example to follow. Even while we were with you, we gave you this command: those unwilling to work will not get to eat. Yet we hear that some of you are living idle lives, refusing to work and meddling in other people's business. We command such people and urge them in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ to settle down, work to earn their own living. As for the rest of you, dear brothers and sisters, never get tired of doing good. That's a good verse. That's from the New Living Translation, by the way. I read New Living Translation Sunday for Ephesians. I know Noah's a big fan. I'm a big fan. I love the New Living. It reads really easily. I like that.
For people that might not like the translation choices, one of the reasons I like it is they tell you why they make the translation choices that they do, where the NIV and the ESV don't. And so if you buy an NLT, there's footnotes throughout the entire Bible of, we chose this translation because of such and such. Yeah. And so you can really dig
there's
into.
There's some transparency to why they
There
chose.
is an open transparency to it that is not in the other translations. And I don't care as much about the actual translation as I care about what's your philosophy going into it. So,
that's a really interesting one. That may have to be another episode too, just Bible translations. I know a lot of people would be interested in that. Yeah. But I think that verse is just a really good summary of a lot of things. I'm glad you reminded me of that, because one point that definitely comes out of here is I think this applies especially to believers, so specifically other people in the church. If you're refusing to do anything and you're just freeloading off of what's going on in the church, Paul really clearly here is just hey, you can't do that. You got to go work. You got to go, and he gives the example of them as apostles. Their work was the church work. So they of anybody could have just been we'll just hang out with you. We'll eat with you. This is our work, the church work we're doing. But he said to set a good example for them. They're no, we're not going to do that. We're going to pay you for any food that we get. We're going to make sure that we work so we can set a good example for you. So especially in the church with other church members, I do think that the church needs to draw those boundaries, and I think it's biblical even in this example of just being hey, you got to show us something. That doesn't mean you got to but just show us that you're doing something, that you're working, that you're not just sitting here freeloading. But I love how he ends that, where he says, but despite all of this, he says, as for the rest of you, so all of those you that are working and doing your job and being helpful, dear brothers and sisters, never get tired of doing good. Because there's a certain type of person I know who wasn't good at drawing those boundaries early in life, spent a lot of time helping a lot of other people, never got that returned back, and then they just became jaded and were just I'm done with people. Yeah. Whatever. People are the worst. I'm never going to do anything good for them. And I think Paul is trying to avoid that. He's look, all of you that are doing good, keep doing that. Don't give up. Don't get tired, even if people take advantage of you, even if some of these people are refusing to work. And I think that is an important encouragement we have to give people. And so I think that applies especially to believers. I do think with non-Christians, people that aren't in the church, the example we get, I would say one of the clearest examples you can get is from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus says, if someone tries to take your tunic, give them your cloak also. If someone asks you to walk a mile for them, walk 2 miles.
Run, not walk.
Yeah. If someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek and let them strike that too. I think within the church, we were talking about this earlier. I guess that was before we started recording. Within the church, we have a responsibility to judge each other and hold each other up to the highest possible standard. Outside of the church, I don't think it's our job to be doing those scales sometimes of being I'm not going to help you unless you help me. I'm not going to do this unless you help me. inside the church, that may be helpful sometimes. To just be like, dude, you're freeloading. You're not doing anything. Pull your own weight. Let's see what we can do. But outside of the church, I know one of the best things that we can do sometimes is to help people, not just even when they don't deserve it, but especially when they don't deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the greatest visuals of the gospel, because, we didn't deserve any of the grace that is given to us. And so we can carry that forward to other people, especially when they don't deserve it, especially when they are people who just in no way deserve you helping them out.
Do you think that
You
can
help them out.
draw them to the kingdom of heaven?
Absolutely.
Like even when they, like if you're giving them something that they know they don't deserve, that they didn't earn, and you're just like, I'm just giving it to you because, I want to, even if you don't necessarily need it and you can go get it yourself.
Yeah.
Like,
I think there's even verses that say that. There's a verse I preached on a few months ago at my home church from 1 Peter, where Peter says that he's talking to slaves at the time who were slaves of really harsh masters that weren't good masters. And he encourages those slaves to still be obedient to those masters, even though those masters are terrible people. And he says the purpose of that is that you might win them over to the Lord. Because, it's easy to follow somebody, do what somebody says when they are a good person who's earned your respect. But if they're terrible people and you still do what they say, then that really shows kind of the difference of the frame of mind that a Christian would have versus other people in the world.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking about it from two kind of perspectives. It kind of reminded me of when Jesus went to the Simon the Pharisee's house. And so the woman comes in and then she's washing his feet, and Simon is thinking to himself, like, well, if he knew what kind of woman this was, he wouldn't be allowing her to do this. And so, basically at the end of it, Jesus is like, those who are forgiven much, they love much who are forgiven much. And so it's like, because he was a Pharisee and he felt like he was higher than she was, he felt like, it's almost like he felt no obligation to do any of these things for Jesus, but because she was a sinner and he loved her and forgave her anyway, it gave her all the more reason to do what she did.
Yeah.
And so it kind of reminded me of that when you were saying that, because that does make a lot of more sense.
No,
when
that's
you
a great that's a great connection. And so it's just kind of like sometimes when we are doing, because I think we get this flipped sometimes. I think sometimes we are just killing ourselves to help other people within the church who aren't pulling their own weight, And meanwhile, people outside of the church were like, well, I don't know, they're a drug addict. I'm not going to give them any money until they get off drugs.
Because they're going to spend it on drugs.
Or,
Yeah.
And so we're really good at drawing boundaries with those outside the church, and maybe bad at doing it with those within the church. And maybe one of the best things we can do is flip that.
Yeah,
script
well,
a little.
and what do you think of this? This is something that I've seen just outside of the church as well as inside. It's the same topic, but it's opening it up a little bit. But I was reading through some of the reviews on just various apps on the App Store, because I don't know why I was doing that, but I was. And there's an app called Bumble that most people know about, that's like a dating app and stuff. And the top review on it was so interesting. It was a lady, and she was complaining about how Bumble needed to do a better job of weeding out people that needed mental health. Because for her, she would get on Bumble and she would meet this guy or whatever it was, and instantly find out that they had a bunch of like mental health problems or whatever. And she was adamant that it's not her responsibility to take care of someone when literally they just met on this dating app or whatever. And so she was wanting like some type of other thing to be in the works to sort of filter out those types of people, because she didn't see that as her responsibility, right? And that's kind of where we're shifting to in this world, is that we sort of filter out anybody's like struggles with that mental health and things to more professional, side of things. And so I've seen that also been affected in the church, is that like people are very reticent to even have conversations
Yeah.
with anybody that struggles with that
Yeah.
because
It's not my job.
because
That's,
well, one,
Yeah.
they feel like they're underqualified. They don't
Right.
really know how to handle that. What if this person goes suicidal, and like, two, sometimes those people are clingy. They text every day,
Yeah.
like how do you like setting boundaries for that is really difficult. Setting boundaries could even set them into a further depression spiral. So how do you deal with that, And so I've seen a lot of cases where that's been handled badly, and so I'm just curious with the topic of boundaries, how do you think you would approach that if someone were to?
Well, I think that is an incredible topic for next week.
Okay.
'Cause we're actually
Wow, I
nearing
didn't
the end
realize
of our
That was
time here.
quick, though.
Yeah, that was really quick.
We these conversations are always fun. We always go really long, and I do think that that's a great topic. Because it's kind of continuing this idea of boundaries, but I guess the specific question maybe for next week is more along the lines of responsibility. What is your responsibility about other people? Where does that responsibility lie? And
Yeah.
when is maybe that someone else's responsibility and not my responsibility?
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes when is the boundary line drawn because that's something somebody else should be dealing with and not something I should
Yeah.
be dealing with.
I did just have
So-
one thing, I guess,
Sure.
to say to end that out. But I guess when you were saying that, it made me think that I think that people who have issues like that, sometimes they just want somebody to talk to, and they
Yeah.
just use those apps as a reason to talk to someone.
Right.
And so it made me think about, because I was thinking about this the other day, and I know that I've heard people say before that, specifically in the Black community, I don't know anywhere else, that a lot of mental health issues go undiagnosed because people are not aware of it. And I think a lot of it is just, and I don't know how it is in other communities, but I know in Black communities, some people feel like it's like a stigma with going to the therapist. It's like, I'm not going to go spend all this money at a therapist to go talk to somebody. Like, all I need is Jesus. All I need to do is go to church. And, because I had a cousin, a different one from the one I was talking to a couple weeks ago. And I know that he had a woman who would come to the house to, just to talk to him about stuff. And then there was like a little bit of a debate about, like, he doesn't need to do that. All he needs to do is go to church, and all he needs to do is, all he needs is Jesus. And so they were trying to be like, okay, well, there's nothing wrong with him talking
Right.
to someone. And I think there's a lot of stigma associated with it because people feel like, well, if I go to a therapist, I'm crazy, or they don't want to spend all the money, or they feel like I'm not going to spend hundreds of dollars for somebody to tell me something I already know. And
So maybe let's do that even more specific. Let's narrow it down even more specifically for next week. Then let's talk about this continued question about boundaries and responsibilities, and let's narrow it down specifically to issues with mental health and other people, and we can kind of talk about both of those.
Okay.
Because I know we've had a lot of conversations about mental health ourselves, and within the church that can be an interesting and difficult conversation to have. So it might be helpful to people to talk about that specific issue a little bit with boundaries next week. So I'm going to leave it on that. We'll leave it as a teaser. You guys got to tune in again next week to check in on that.
Lord willing, we don't have some huge project next week we got to do and cancel.
Right, for real. So tune in next week, hear about that specific topic. Otherwise, I would encourage any of you that are watching or listening later, we would love for you guys to tune in with us this Sunday. We've got a really cool church service planned. Gonna have a worship service, and we have our intern this summer, Jacob Dooley.
Hey.
He's going to be preaching for us, and I'm really excited about it. He's really excited about it. I know he would love to have as many people watching, and especially in the room. Any of you that want to come join us in person, we would love to see all of y'all here. I know Jacob would love to see you here for his sermon this Sunday. I think it's going to be really, really cool.
And what time is it?
It is at 7 p.m.
Okay.
and it's here in the Dwayne Dudka Memorial Chapel on the campus of Mid-South Christian College.
Okay.
It's 3097 Knight Road. So 7 p.m. We hope to see you all there. Otherwise, we will see you next week for that conversation about mental health and boundaries on the weekly deep dive. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.